Welcome to Deeper with Dani, a podcast where we dig deep because everything is that serious. I apologize for the extreme delay. I have been trying to follow a schedule, but life has been getting in the way. I am trying not to let that discourage me. Usually, I end up wanting to crawl back into my cave, but I figured if I want things to change this year, I might as well just keep showing up and see what happens. So, happy to announce though that while I'm still trying to figure out the schedule for the pod, I have started uploading voiceovers of my blog posts on Substack at 𝖎𝑗ustdani.substack.com. So at least the very recent posts have voiceovers already. Like just in case you can't get enough of the podcast, I'd like to believe that there's some of you who are like, I've listened to everything. I want more. Like just in case, who knows? Maybe some of you want more. So the blog posts are more verbose, and depending on when I record, because again, I live with family members, I don't have the privilege of privacy a lot of the time. Depending on my tone, how loud I sound in the voiceover, you'll get to figure out if I'm with somebody or if I'm filming past my bedtime. Yeah, I just realized earlier because I was alone earlier today and I got to record a bunch of blog posts and I listened to them and I was like, I sound very loud here. And it's mainly because I'm alone. There's no live audience. Anyway, with that aside, I figured that to wrap up Women's Month and to welcome my birth month, I'd like to keep talking about women and share a synthesis of everything that I have learned during Women's Month. I'm actually very proud of myself this year because I got to attend so many different events organized by women for women. I opened up the month attending the National Women's Summit alongside the Southeast Asian Women's Summit in Miriam College, where I got to meet different female leaders from all over Southeast Asia as well as locally. And it was a 2-day conference where there were breakout sessions, which I found more memorable than the plenary sessions. Like, not to pit women against each other, but there were themes that came out of the breakout sessions that I chose. So I chose 2 breakout sessions, one for each day. The first one was about archiving, the importance of women participating in recording history. There was one panelist who talked about how important it was to queer the archives. I found this to be such an interesting phrase because if you think about it, history really was written by the victors or by those in power. And one way for women to reclaim their power and to really fight back is to own the narratives of their lived experiences. So it's very important to just like use memory as resistance, as they put it in the small group discussion. The other small group discussion or the breakout session that I attended was about the informal care work economy. So in feminist studies, care work refers to the labor that individuals tend to enact that involve caring for other people, like nurturing them from their basic needs to their psychological needs. And often, these roles are enacted by women. Think being a kasambahay, being a housewife, being the tagasalo in one's family, basically being the one who catches all the responsibility out of everybody in the family, whether it is agreed upon or not. More often than not, it's usually women who take on these roles. And I got to hear from many different women from different sectors, particularly in the informal work economy, like kasambahays, labor leaders, and they talked about how care work is pretty much the backbone of civilization, but it's not taken as seriously as other more serious or more masculine positions, such as being a leader, being the head of the household. It made me realize that, when it comes to running a community, sustaining a group, there's so much care that is involved there that women are typically responsible for because it's expected of them, and yet they're not rewarded for it as much as they deserve to, which is frustrating. Apart from the research conference that I attended, I also got to continue my streak of going to the movies. I was able to catch a bunch of films at a very affordable rate, I must say. This is not sponsored, but I have been going to the Met, the Metropolitan Theater in Manila, where they typically host movies for free or at a low rate. But the 2 times I've gone so far, they've been for free. I have also been going to the movies in UP Film Institute, it's either at like 150 to 200 pesos. 150 is discounted for like students, PWD, senior citizens, and 200 is like the regular rate. And I got to catch extra at the Met with a talkback session with Ruby Ruiz and Vilma Santos, both of whom starred in the film. And I also got to watch 𝖕𝖊𝖋𝖊𝖈𝖊𝖈, directed by Sigrid Bernardo, starring Angel Aquino and my cousin. My cousin starred there as adult Anita. So Jay, if you're listening, hi. I really love the film. And it wasn't just because my cousin was there. It was because of the story. Both films, even if they were totally different, Extra was a surrealist film about what it's like working as an extra in the film industry. It starred a single mother portrayed by Vilma Santos, who's really determined that she's gonna get her big break. She really finds it to be a dignifying job to be an extra, because if it weren't for extras, the movie wouldn't come to life. And I found that to be a very profound reflection on such an informal type of job. And you get to see there's a pattern. Women are often subjected to very informal types of work and labor. So much is expected from these types of work, yet the rewards are very minimal, or are not as much as their male counterparts. In Ang Huling Chacha ni Anita, while it is marketed to be a young girl's queer awakening in the form of an older woman named Pilar, portrayed by Angel Aquino, who else, right? In this coming-of-age film, they end up tackling deeper issues that involve a woman's reputation. As I watched Ang Huling Chacha ni Anita, I couldn't help but think of how this would make such a good double feature with Sunshine. Antoinette Hadon's Sunshine. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Because they went there too. They went there. And by there, I'm not gonna be spoiling anything, but in that film, they focused on how society portrays a woman negatively. And when a woman is portrayed in a negative light, it's typically because she exercises more autonomy than people are used to. And I found that to be such an interesting theme in the film, because yes, I know it's about having a crush on Angel Aquino as a kid, but I liked how they took the risk and dared to have this conversation about why women get punished for wanting to be independent. And I couldn't help but remember what I've learned in my advanced theories of personality class. There's so many different theories, right? And one of them is the Big Two taxonomy, where you can classify individuals as either agentic, or those who prioritize their agency, or those who are communal, or those who prioritize communion. Agentic individuals value independence, autonomy, individuality. It's usually about the self. And a lot of the time, people consider this to be a masculine trait. On the other hand, being a communal individual means you're relational, you value community, you value interconnectedness, and care is such an important part of who you are. And of course, people have learned to attribute this to femininity. With these personality characteristics, people now view it from a gendered lens, primarily because of the roles associated with such traits. You'd think there'd be no repercussions to perceiving individuals this way, right? Where men are just really agentic, women are more communal. You'd think it's just harmless observation. But I've found that in participating in these events, listening to lived experiences not only of women who are similar to me, but from women who live totally different lives than my own, I've come to realize that this kind of perspective does more harm than good. I hope this makes sense as I move on along to one of the last couple of activities that I got to participate in last month. One, I got to attend a lecture on PCOS, which was organized by the UP Center for Women's Studies. They talked about how PCOS is very prevalent among women, among adult women, yet it remains very underrepresented in research simply because it is a woman's health issue and it's not a medical issue faced by men. I was livid learning that, because what do you mean millions of women experience PCOS. Well, I'm not diagnosed. I feel like I have some of the symptoms. I'm still too scared to actually verify that with a doctor, and I know I should just move past my health anxiety and just get it over with. But it's easier said than done. There's also like this whole misogyny that seeps through the cracks of the medical system. As much as I consider myself to be a brave person, it can be terrifying sometimes, especially when it involves your own health. That aside, there was one more event that I attended. It was a short film screening organized by Hyperfocus PH, where they gathered short films created by women from across Southeast Asia. I really love, like off the top of my head, I really loved Baby Fat and Wash. Those two films stood out to me because, well, Baby Fat was about like a very mestiza girl who's fat and had to wear a Filipiniana for school. I found myself well represented there, like as a mestiza myself who was bullied by older adults for her size. I felt that I wasn't bullied as much as other young kids were, because my being mestiza kind of shielded me from like the very traumatic experience that comes with growing up fat. Wash was more systemic, I guess, in addressing what it means to be a girl, what it means to be women. It was a short film about students who were in a camp of sorts. I don't know if it was a summer camp or something, but they were there and they were reprimanded for not washing their pads. I don't know if it was just like a cultural thing, but I found it strange because what do you mean you have to wash these pads and you have to be clean? It had me, again, reflecting on womanhood and how purity culture is so prevalent in what defines a woman. And it's so frustrating because one of the very natural things that happen to us, which is menstruating, bleeding, whatever you call it, it's natural. It happens to the best of us. Nobody is exempt from that unless you got like health issues. I get it. But like generally speaking, right? Menstruation is a bodily experience when you are AFAB. Yet we are demonized, vilified even for experiencing that publicly. The movie made me realize that I'm glad to have lived at a time where I studied at an all-girls Catholic school, no less, but we were very open about conversations surrounding menstruation. But they were very surface level, like, oh, you seen my pad? Just like that. When I went to college, though, I was really surprised by how quiet my girlfriends were when talking about being on their period and stuff. I was very used to being loud about it, or just like casually talking about it in conversation. But regardless, I think that menstruation, women's sexual health, women's reproductive health need to be talked about more. These were all the things that I attended. I'm so proud to have attended all these. It was fun. I had so much fun learning from different women, from learning new things. But I was also so angry. Every event, there was some kind of anger brewing inside of me because with all these different experiences, I've been wondering, like, what really defines a woman? What does it mean to be a woman? You know how in like the Q&A portion of pageants, where one of the most commonly asked questions is, what does it mean to be a woman? What is the essence of womanhood? And I remember in elementary or high school, I don't remember the specifics of it, but I remember watching a rehearsal for like Miss United Nations or whatever kind of pageant usually happens at school. One of my classmates was like, did you know that a question that they ask is, what is the essence of a woman? And I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, what do you mean? What is the essence of a woman? Why are we looking at the usefulness, the utility of a woman? I don't know who said it, but apparently the correct answer to that is to give birth, to procreate. Being in a Catholic school, I get it. But like, as I look back on that experience, I was like, is that really our essence? Is that like the peak of womanhood? Are we defined simply from a biological standpoint? Or are we like an ogre with many layers? I'd like to think we share that with Shrek. There are many layers to us and we are deeply misunderstood. Yeah. But seriously speaking, I went to all these events thinking, what defines womanhood? What sets us apart from other people? And how is our identity formed? How is it shaped? How is it changed? Viewing it from the perspective of womanhood alone and not approaching it from an intersectional perspective waters down the conversation by a ton. Because if you only view it from a biological perspective, you're only viewing one aspect of womanhood. And I find that to be such a short-sighted way of having this conversation. I found my answer though in my anger after thinking about it for a time, because especially that people hate feminists. People hate women who identify as feminists. And even if I kind of look like the poster child for the social justice warrior that people like fighting, girl with the micro bangs, with the nose piercing, with eyeliner, with a butt actually stance, I know I'm the poster child for the angry feminist. And while I don't really care about what other people say about me, of course, I'm still open to criticism, right? Maybe there's something to learn from that. And I thought about it for a time and I wondered, why am I so angry? And I'm angry because there's so much violence that comes with being a woman, especially when you add other factors such as being a disabled woman, being a woman of color, being a poor woman, being a woman who deviates from traditional gender roles. There's so much violence that comes with being a woman. And you know how there's this TikTok that I came across previously where it's like, when you can't ignore that misogyny just reeks in every conversation that you have and every joke that people make, you just can't stop thinking about it. I really fight the urge to fight people, but I know I've garnered a reputation among my friends as the angry rage baiter of men, which honestly I take pride in. It's an act of microfeminism, I'd like to believe. But jokes aside, I can justify the rage that I feel, the anger that I have. It's because of how misogyny deeply affects the quality of life that we have. It's that serious. It's not just like, I hate men. It's never just hating men as individuals. It's hating the patriarchy itself. It's hating the system that we currently have in place. Like when men hate women, it isn't just about, haha, she's just a girl. She can't do anything. It's more violent than that. It's more violent. It's more serious than that. I swear. Like if you're a girl, if you know, you know. Like if you're a girl, you already know. If you're a woman, you already know. It doesn't matter how much you try to like justify it or you try to downplay it. You are familiar with the violence that I'm talking about. There's so many structural barriers and threats that we women are all too familiar with. So let me introduce you to the pyramid of sexual violence. The bottom constitutes attitudes and beliefs that we have about men and women. This is the gender binary. This is viewing gender from an essentialist point of view, where you think that everything about who we are is inherent, is natural. It's something that cannot be changed. We are destined to be like this. Attitudes and beliefs also include enabling and reinforcing traditional gender roles, where women belong to the kitchen, men are supposed to be the head of household, they're supposed to be providers. You know, the typical alpha male bullshit that you see on the internet, on the manosphere specifically. And the female counterpart for this is the trad wife aesthetic on TikTok. Nara Smith, I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you, girl. And I think that in this particular part of the pyramid, what I like to focus on here is care work. Going back to what I talked about earlier, in how much we take for granted how much care work women do to keep not only their households alive, but the very communities that we participate in alive and well, believing that care work is only for women and that it shouldn't be appreciated or compensated as fairly as other types of labor. I think that is where it all starts. Believing that caring, nurturing are inherent to women. That is a dangerous mindset to have, because then people end up raising boys and men who think that being caring, being nurturing are feminine traits. Therefore, they stop participating in housework. It's not something that men are used to being part of. And I feel like that has to change significantly. Even if now we're at a point where there are parents who try to raise their girls and boys the same. According to United Nations Women, on average, women still undertake 2.5 times more hours every day on unpaid care work than men. Girls learn this early and provide 160 million more hours every day on unpaid care and domestic work than boys. So we're socialized at an early age. And even if you say, oh, these are just beliefs, these are just attitudes, it's not going to affect our behavior. You cannot be more wrong than that. As an extension, actually, of care work, when you believe that it is only exclusive to women, to be nurturing. This translates into reinforcing the very essentialist perspective of, okay, because girls are more caring naturally, it does make sense that girls mature quicker or faster than boys. Ever heard of that? We've all heard of that. We've all been told that, oh, you're so mature for your age. Whereas your male cousins at the family function like to be silly and all that. And they're like, I don't know, 21. Whereas you see your younger cousins who are at like, I don't know, 10, 11. And you see everyone just like looking at them and being like, oh, dalagita ka na. You're so beautiful. May manliligaw na ba? Guys, come on. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean you start viewing young girls as women at the age of 10? We'll get to that because that's like at the top. It's at the top of the pyramid of misogyny and or sexual violence. But there's an irony to that, right? When you view women as the more mature gender who matures faster emotionally, for some reason, even if like we become more mature at a faster rate than men, somehow we're the more emotional one. We're the ones who can't think properly. And you're like, but who started all these wars in the history of human civilization? How many women started wars? How many? Exactly. It's mostly men. But going to care work, because I feel like personally that's like the root cause of this, or at least like one of the root causes that I'd like to talk about and emphasize here in the pod, because this is where violence begins. Just believing that being nurturing is just for women, it harms everybody. You have to wonder, why is it that way? Like, why do we think that being nurturing is for women only? We go back again to the big two taxonomy in personality research, where being communal is a feminine trait, being agentic is a masculine trait. It is our culture, our environment that greatly shapes this and determines how much of this is reinforced. And in a patriarchal society such as the Philippines, where gender roles are still very much prevalent, it's kind of really hard to challenge that. But I'd like to believe I'm surrounded by individuals who are able to challenge that, by young people who question that, and it gives me hope. At the same time, however, living in an era where social media plays such a big role in what messages are pushed out into one's feed, and that there are bigger powers at play who determine what gets pushed out or what gets promoted or what ends up being shadow banned on our timelines, it's also very scary. This is why I try to make a conscious effort to purge my socials and make sure that the people I follow, the publications I subscribe to, have content or information that allows me to stay critical. It's so important to be critical these days, to make sure that you exercise your brain cells, especially that AI overviews are becoming more and more pushy about making themselves known. It's scary. TLDR, social media plays a huge role in that as well. And so I try to avoid following celebrities, following individuals whose lives are clearly not realistic, or those individuals with politics that are obviously very problematic. I like keeping my following list realistic, aka people who do perform on social media, but not to the extent where they're promoting propaganda altogether. This requires being proactive as a social media user, I feel. So there's so much personal responsibility, and it's frustrating to me because it's a systemic issue. So moving on from attitudes and beliefs, as you progress in the pyramid of sexual violence, it starts to become individual acts of prejudice. It starts to become objectification, fetishizing how women behave or present themselves, and interestingly, weaponized incompetence. I'm part of a Facebook group called Bridge the Gap community, where it's mostly women who talk about the gaps, the gender gaps in their relationships, their heterosexual relationships. So in heteronormative relationships, there is what women call a mental load. And this is how much time you spend thinking about everything that you have to do to keep a relationship up and running, or to keep a household up and running if these women are married or cohabiting with their male partners. This group has opened my eyes to the horrors of weaponized incompetence, where women are expected, again, to engage in absurd levels of care work to the point where it's ridiculous. Like, what do you mean the wife or the woman has to remember her partner's mother's birthday and send out the cards on her partner's behalf? What do you mean men are not familiar when their kids were born, what their medical history is, or what issues they face that teachers must know about. What do you mean women are typically the spokesperson in the family, but they don't have as much power as they're supposed to in these kinds of relationships? It's crazy. And we refer to this as an individual act of prejudice because, again, it's only one person enabling such bad behavior or engaging in bad behavior, rather. This is where these attitudes and beliefs translate into something more violent. Like, you're not just thinking about it anymore, you're actually engaging in a behavior that harms women. I used to think that being an angry woman would help me ward off the creeps, but it's so damaging. It's so horrible to remember that whatever I do, I'm always going to be someone's fetish or someone's object of desire. If I'm angry, it's going to be a turn on for someone. If I'm too kind, it's going to turn someone on. It's going to make them think or make them entitled to my body, to my attention. And I've had this experience as well, at least through the DMs. I remember there was a medical student from a school that I will not name because they did not do anything about it, and I'm not here to get sued by that school. There was this medical student from like 2021 who said to me that he masturbates to my photos. He said this because I posted an ask box on Instagram with the prompt, "Oh, the year's about to end. Confess something to me that you've always wanted to say." And that's what this boy chose to tell me. A woman he has never had any sort of proper interaction with. I don't know if this guy was just an idiot. Like, he didn't even bother making a dump account of sorts, but it was all there. He had a public profile. I reported him to his guidance office first. The guidance office was just like very apologetic on his behalf, and they did not do anything about it. This is a story that has happened to me more times than I'd like to admit, but I'm only going to be sharing one story because I don't want to be reliving all these experiences. But I'll share another one where I called this other boy out for pointing out that one of the most attractive things about me was my cleavage. And while yes, I know that I have a nice rack, I do not know you. We're not close. I did not consent to being sexualized. I don't care if you think I dress like a slut. That does not give you the right to disrespect me like that. I looked him up on LinkedIn. He blocked me everywhere. And I posted a PSA. This man's mother ended up sending a strongly worded email to me apologizing for her son's behavior. Boy, what do you mean? What do you mean you had your mom apologize to me on your behalf? Shame. That's another act of prejudice, not just to me, but to his mom too. What do you mean you're involving your mom in this? You're grown. You're a grown man. So yeah, prejudice. When enough people do that, when enough men, enough individuals are violent enough, it stops being individual acts of prejudice. It levels up to institutional discrimination. What does this look like? Lack of access to healthcare, reproductive health especially, workplace inequality, such as that glass ceiling that we encounter as women in the workplace, and care work not being taken as seriously as other forms of labor. So I did talk about care work not being taken seriously, where, you know, from kasambahays to housewives not being honored well, being disrespected still, despite how big of an impact their work has in our day-to-day lives. It's frustrating. Apart from care work, again, reproductive health rights, there have been news about teenage pregnancies becoming a bigger problem these days, and it's mainly because abortion is still not legal. When we talk about comprehensive sexual education, people like to sanitize it, and they'd like to tackle sex ed from a very religious standpoint, to the point where it just becomes some kind of moralistic playground where all these religious figures just have to preach to women that they ought to stay pure up until they get married. And it helps nobody. It helps nobody. It protects predators. That's when it escalates into violence altogether, which is at the very top of the pyramid. Apart from lack of access to healthcare, workplace inequality, so the concept of a glass ceiling is often observed in women. So there's typically an invisible barrier that keeps people from getting promoted at work. Again, it goes back to care work. When women become mothers, they're seen more as a liability than an asset in the workplace, unless they work twice as hard compared to their male counterparts and they prove that they are still useful despite having other priorities. And while yes, we're at a point where men like to participate more in housework, I still feel like we should be trying harder the advocate for equality, not just at home, but also at work. So can you imagine? Motherhood is marketed to women, motherhood, marriage are promoted to women, and yet when women achieve these things, they are punished for it in other places, such as the workplace. Much to think about. It all goes back to care work not being taken seriously. And at the top, at the very, very top of this pyramid of sexual violence, we have violence and death, gender based violence. And yes, I'm talking about all kinds of women, including trans women. So, in case you missed the memo, I do believe trans women are women. I don't like using terms biological woman. I don't like using the term real woman. I don't like using any of those terms. I do use cisgender and transgender because that's what we use in the social sciences. Cisgender women are women whose sex assigned at birth matches their lived experiences as women, or their psychological experience rather, whereas transgender women have a sex assigned at birth that does not match their psychological experience. I also hate it when people drag psychology into this mess to justify their transphobia by saying that being trans is an illness. But if you actually look at the research, the cure to gender dysphoria is gender affirming care. Yes, by believing people when they say that they feel like a woman, they feel like a man, and then they're born otherwise. You just have to support them as they transition into the version of themselves that they feel authentic in. So going back, trans women are women, and trans women are part of this conversation about gender-based violence. Why? Because cisgender women, trans women have a lot more common than we think. Again, it's because of how violence shapes our perceptions and our experiences of womanhood. I cannot remove my trans sisters from this conversation. And if you hate it, these are my politics. You gotta deal with it. And I'd like to think I've done enough research to have this fully formed opinion, to actually stand by it, and to tell anyone who disagrees with me in a very emotional way that they could just suck it. Yeah. But going back, at the very top of the pyramid of sexual violence, it's gender based violence. From assault to rape to just dying at the hands of perpetrators of misogyny. We're all too familiar with this feeling. 4 out of 5 women will report being sexually harassed throughout their lives. 4 out of 5 women that you know might have had their encounters where it's either, oh, it was nothing, it was a weird experience, or to full blown horror experiences of being raped, of being threatened, or worse, being killed. And according to the Philippine Commission on Women, 1 in 3 women, that's approximately 736 million women aged 15 and older, have experienced physical and or sexual violence in their lifetime, often at the hands of an intimate partner. And often, this intimate partner is a man. Another report by a nonprofit called Chameleon Association shared that 70% of sexually abused children are between ages of 10 to 18 years old, and 98% of these survivors are girls. At a very young age, women are exposed to violence. That becomes the rite of passage to being women. And it sickens me. It makes me sick to my stomach just realizing how sexual violence is part of the collective narrative of women. It doesn't have to be that way. And they continue to report that rape remains to be the most frequent type of abuse, followed by incest and fondling. And the incest percentage is alarming because it's at 33%. Moreover, recently, the Child Rights Network and the Philippine Legislators Committee on Population and Development shared that based on the PSA 2024 statistics, pregnancies among girls under the age of 15 often involve significantly older men. Majority of men did not state their age, but the next highest number of men are 6 to 10 years older than these young girls. So assuming most of these teenage pregnancies are at 15, the fathers are between the ages of 21 to 25. What are you doing with the child? And there are even 24 cases of teenage pregnancies caused by men who are 20 years older than these young mothers. So not to spoil Sunshine, but in the film Sunshine, starring 𝖕𝖔𝖓, one of the characters that she meets is a pregnant girl who's probably between the ages of 12, 13, 11 even, I would say. And she shares that she got pregnant not because she was messing around with a boy her age, but because her uncle raped her. And this is a reality that is more common than we actually think. But because we live in a society where the reputation of a group sometimes, often, is more important than an individual suffering, there are people who would go lengths to covering this up and making sure it does not spread. And it causes so much harm, so much trauma to the young girl, to the young woman going through that. And it sickens me knowing that while there are reports like these, I am very sure that these statistics don't even grasp half of the picture of violence and misogyny here in the Philippines. With how common these stories of creeps are among women, you can't tell me that only a certain percentage of women experience that. So many people refuse to report, whether it's the survivor herself or the survivor's family, the survivor's network. Many people continue to enable it. Despite everything that I've just shared, it's still very important to remember that we've come a long way. Women can sustain their own lifestyles now. Singlehood is not as stigmatized as it used to be, and women are beginning to challenge long-standing gender roles. But again, I don't want to brush it off. Our anger is just as important. It's so important to stay angry. But I guess the more important question to be asking here is, what do we do with all the rage? And I remember in the National Women's Summit and the Southeast Asian Women's Summit that I attended earlier in March, we had a roundtable discussion among different female leaders in Southeast Asia. And one of the panelists was Miss 𝖬𝖊𝖋𝖊𝖈𝖊𝖈, the executive director of the Sangsan Anakot Yawachon Foundation in Thailand, which is an organization that seeks to empower indigenous women. She had such a powerful speech that moved everybody in the plenary, where she was angered by the sexual exploitation experienced by indigenous women in Thailand. She was just so frustrated by it. Like, even if she couldn't fully capture her anger in words, because of like all the horror stories she must have experienced and witnessed firsthand, she said something along the lines of, angry is not enough. You have to transform that anger into creativity, into action. And it's not to romanticize anger, right? You're not supposed to turn it into something beautiful. But rather, I think anger should be the fuel that we use to drive change. Not just on an individual level, but also at a more systemic level too. It's not just about changing our lifestyles, being more aware on our own and calling people out in our immediate circle. It's about finding causes bigger than ourselves and devoting much of our lives to that. Because, you can't be angry for the rest of our lives and just keep it that way. Something has to change. So what do we do now? Now that we're angry, we advocate for change. We look at how misogyny shows up in our day-to-day lives, and we try to fight it one small step at a time. We continue to tell stories. We create. We breathe life into what makes us alive. I think that's what it means to be a woman. I think being a woman means breathing life into our ideas, to create and to care. That's what it's supposed to be about. So some of my small acts of feminism include just being braver, more courageous, being louder, taking up space, lifting weights, lifting heavy, allowing myself to be heavy, to be an inconvenience to others, but also making sure that I take pride in the care work that I do, making sure that the care work that I do involves people who are deserving of that care, those who are able to appreciate the level of care that I give, and pouring into communities where I think my anger can be transformed into something more powerful. I guess that's a good way to cap off Women's Month. Happy Women's Month to all women. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Yeah, that was a lot. It was heavy, but I'll be sharing some links to if ever you need support for your mental health, if you ever need support as someone going through abuse, harassment, exploitation of sorts. I'll be leaving numbers, contact information in the description box. Let me know what you think of this episode. What are your experiences like as a woman? How much care work do you do in your day-to-day life now that we've talked about it? And do you think it's fair how people respond to the amount of care that you give? And how can we bridge the gap between men and women when it comes to being agentic and being communal? If you like this episode, please rate me 5 stars on Spotify. Share it on Instagram. Tag me at @𝖊𝖋𝖊𝖈 or at @NotJustDani. I'd love to know what you think. You can comment as well if you're listening on Spotify or on YouTube. I'll be opening my Ask box soon. I'll probably create a Google form because I really want to bring back my advice column, Dear Dani, and bring it back here in the pod. So if you're interested in that, let me know so I could create the Google form soon. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Feel free to suggest as well, by the way. I'll be sharing my email. Thanks for being here.